marriage is a contract. And I think we get caught up in the romance surrounding weddings and marriage and, you know, the dresses and the flowers and the beautiful ceremonies, that we forget that when we sign the marriage certificate, we're ultimately signing up to a contract.
People feel so overwhelmed when they first come to me. The most common worry or concern they have is, am I going to be okay?
I always say to people, like, you're kind of running 3 marathons simultaneously. It's a marathon within a marathon within a marathon.
Well, what's going to happen? Am I going to be able to stay in the house? You know, what's it going to look like at the end? And actually, we can't necessarily go through all of that right at the beginning because there's so much more information that we need and we need to dig down on. Hello, I'm Liza Gatrell, family lawyer at Stowe Family Law. Welcome to Life, Love and the Law, the Stowe Family Law podcast. In this episode, I am joined by Jodie Phelps, financial planner, and also Tom Nash, also known as the divorce coach. Before we get started on the topic of the day, which is the first steps to divorce, would you both just take a couple of seconds to introduce yourselves to the listeners?
I'm Jodie Phelps. I'm a financial advisor, but I specialise in divorce separation, so helping clients go through the process of separation, understanding everything financially that they need to, and financial planning during and post-divorce.
I'm Tom Nash, otherwise known as Mr. Divorce Coach, and I help support clients with all of the aspects that sit outside of the financial and legal realms of their separation and divorce, so more their emotional processing, mindset rebuilding, and practicalities, things like co-parenting, effective communication, conflict resolution.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you both for agreeing to come on the podcast again. So topic for today, the first steps of divorce, is slightly different to the last episode that we recorded, which was all about Christmas. So we're talking now about people that are looking towards separating and what they should be considering. So let's start right at the beginning with somebody that's just thinking about whether or not their relationship should be ending. What do they need to be considering there? How do you know when it's the right time to be looking at a divorce?
So as a divorce coach, I work with clients who are in kind of one of 4 realms. So either like kind of pre-divorce or separation, so they're thinking about it, planning, and kind of then process and post. So if I've got a client that comes to me, and quite often they're actually referred by family lawyers or mediators if they've reached out to, or even financial advisors where they've reached out to a legal or financial route first, but actually they're not entirely sure of their decision. And it's not my role to make that decision for them. It's to help them make the decision that they want to make. So it's helping them explore about, have they emotionally checked out of the relationship? Are they more roommates than partners? Are they becoming disconnected in all different forms of their relationship? Is there situations actually that are more external, like how they're being treated, any forms of domestic abuse, coercive control, and if they're looking to create a safe exit strategy, or if actually they're just really not happy and can't understand why. So first and foremost, my focus, even as a divorce coach, isn't advocating for divorce or separation, but it's actually helping people to quantify for their own decision-making process about what's important to them. What do they really want out of their life? Are their values misaligned? And a whole host of other things just to help them come to that decision of if they want to, and then how they want to go about it with a bit more dignity and humility, at which point I would then explore out to the wider team of both financial and legal.
So we'll talk about people that decide to take that step to go down the divorce route. For those, though, that decide actually that they want to work on their relationship, perhaps they've had a chat with you, they've gone through these different factors and they've decided actually, you know, I want to give it another shot. Perhaps it would be helpful just to talk about the types of things perhaps they could do to assist with that with their partner, to, you know, give it that second try.
Well, one of those things is I would be exploring what else have they already attempted. So have they been to marriage counselling, individual therapies? If it's more practical terms, that could still be useful for mediation. So again, if it is salvageable, and it's then looking at, so it's kind of 3 kind of areas. Is it actually mending the existing relationship that's already there? And there's actually a few bits here that need to tweak and change, and maybe it's about improving more effective communication. I have a lot of clients that come to me and say, communication's completely broken down, we don't talk. If we do, it descends, or whatever it might be. But what happens before that communication breakdown is actually a process of disconnection. So actually, is it about, let's work on some connection exercises about how the 2 of you communicate, how we get the 2 of you kind of talking to each other and working together and reconnecting with each other as well. And there's various different exercises around that, from kind of different breathing exercises, eye contact exercises, not just kind of date nights and things like that, but actually a lot deeper connection stuff and exercise that I'd set with people. The second part to that is if it's not able to mend the existing relationship, is actually to grieve the first relationship and then look at bending the existing relationship. So kind of like an upgrade, like version 2.0. If there's wider drastic changes to that. As an example, a couple quite recently where their children had grown up, they'd left home, and it was actually about the kind of the disconnection over the many, many years, couple of decades. And actually it was about the old relationship had been and gone and passed. And actually it's now about an upgrade of, well, what do they want the next phase of their relationship to look like? And actually things that they can do to move forward and changes that they both needed. Or if ultimately it is actually the third and final one, which is end the relationship.
Okay. And Jodie, somebody now that's looking for divorce, so they've decided their relationship has ended, they're coming to see you. What are the initial worries and concerns that you see from people?
People feel so overwhelmed when they first come to me. The most common worry or concern they have is, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be able to stay in the family home? Family home is a massive one, you know, as I'm sure you know yourself. It's like actually they don't want their lives to be impacted. And I think that's the thing I see most often is both people want to maintain the life they've had, you know, financially, but that's not reality. It's going to change, and there's going to be, you know, a new life that they'll then lead. But also it's such an overwhelming time emotionally, especially if you're the one on the receiving end of the separation. I feel like the person who is the one who makes the decision, they've already spent a few months, maybe years, knowing this is going to happen. Whereas the person on the back foot suddenly has to go through this.
They're at ground zero. They're at starting
exactly.
point.
And I see in relationships, there's always one person, well, most commonly one person who takes control of the finances and another person who just lets them. And that's just the way it works. And why have two people doing the same job? So, you know, it's a very common thing. So the person who has never taken control of finances, not only are they going to have to think about, right, I'm going to be on my own, also they don't understand anything that's in place. So for me, the first thing we do together is, right, let's understand the basics. What is in place? You know, what have you got? What assets have you got? What debts have you got? What is your income? What's your outgoings? And kind of helping them with that. Because as soon as you feel clear about that, you're in such a better position to start planning.
And that's probably the first thing that we will talk about as well when they come in to see a divorce or family lawyer is, what do we have to begin with? I mean, I talk about with clients often, if I had a magic wand and I could wave my magic wand and just give you the perfect outcome, what would it look like? Because it's really helpful sometimes to look at just what their priorities are. But like you said, Jodie, unfortunately, sometimes there's just not the assets or the money there to be able to create exactly what everybody wants out of this. So we have to sort of go back a few steps then and look at what the reality is and how do we get there. And with divorce proceedings, what we're looking at is what we call full and frank financial disclosure. So what are the assets? How much is the house worth? What is the mortgage outstanding on it? What are the bank accounts that are there? Are there any investments? Do we have any pensions? And it's almost that fact-finding exercise to begin with. That's one of the most important part of particularly the financial arrangements from the divorce. And it's so common for people to want to skip from A to Z and go, well, particularly in a first meeting, well, what's going to happen? Am I going to be able to stay in the house? You know, what's it going to look like at the end? And actually, we can't necessarily go through all of that right at the beginning because there's so much more information that we need and we need to dig down on. And like you say, sometimes then they don't understand the assets that are there because there might be a complex pension structure or there might be businesses that need to be valued, etc. And that's often one of the most complex bits, is just working out what's there to begin with, to divide.
And I think that mindset as well, like a lot of people come to me, they think their assets are theirs and the other person's assets are theirs. But people don't understand, right? If you're married, that's your marital pot. Yeah. So if it's his pension, you know, her second property or what have you, that is the big pot. And then they feel like, oh, I don't want to take part of the other person's pension, but I'm like, no, it's your joint pot. And I think that's a big thing that people have to overcome emotionally as well. Yeah.
Marriage is a contract. And I think we get caught up in the romance surrounding weddings and marriage and, you know, the dresses and the flowers and the beautiful ceremonies, that we forget that when we sign the marriage certificate, we're ultimately signing up to a contract that binds us financially to the other person and means that ultimately whatever assets are in my name, their name, joint names, they are now matrimonial assets and they're assets of both of us.
If we could take the emotion away from it, it would be so much easier. But that's why we're all here, right? We can have a look at it from, you know, a less emotional point of view and actually help them understand the legal side of it. Yeah. You know, emotional tips and financially what they should be doing.
I think that's the thing about, like, if you're at the start of the process is, like, have the triage of support or the divorce trinity, have financial, legal, emotional, and then the three, let's say those three quadrants can all contribute in terms of practical terms. It's interesting you were saying about like with the family home as the example, right? And again, that's an immediate thing, like because people want to kind of lock down as much security and continuity as possible and minimize any disruption and change. There was some research done about 4, maybe 5 years ago, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was very high. It was around about, I think, somewhere weirdly between sort of 84, 86% there, give or take, who retain the family home following a divorce separation inside 18 months or less, sell and move anywhere. Because once they've kind of got through that scary period and everything's kind of locked down, they've secured everything, they then go, well, actually, I don't want to be around by the ghosts of relationship past, right? And then it's like now they're feeling withheld from being able to take the next step of moving forward and rebuild that new life.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Do you find that the family home is sometimes this kind of...
I think it's the emotional side of it. And I think actually, as time passes, like the divorces I've seen where actually they end up going on a bit longer than, you know, they wanted, actually near the end of it, they kind of have got a whole new light on it because emotionally they've grieved. So then they can actually think about it properly. But yeah, people are so attached to a family home. And I think the most common like mistake I see is people thinking about the here and now and forgetting about the future. The amount of people I see and they think, right, I want the family home. I'm not going to, you know, touch pensions, which I'm sure you see all the time. And what I often say to them is I'm like, right, how would you feel if, you know, that's fine now, but what about in retirement and your ex is, you know, swanning around on holidays, having this glamorous life and you're there worrying about how you're going to pay your bills? You know, I think it's our jobs to look after the future them and not just the here and now, because people get so desperate to get out of this horrible situation that it's really hard for them to see long term.
Get through it. And then, you know, just some of the stuff that I do kind of practically helping people think about some other realities. And again, she's kind of an example of a client from many years ago where they very vehemently wanted to retain the family home. And then when we went through it, they lived in a beautiful thatched cottage in a lovely countryside. And one of the things that they hadn't anticipated was, well, if you don't know much about thatched roofs, but they redoing every like 15, 20 years, and they cost thousands. And actually that was going to be something that would break the bank for this poor lady. And actually now it wasn't really that important.
And it's prioritising. Like, would you rather stay in this expensive home or have a bit of spare money to go on holidays and do nice things? Because it's not just about what you have, it's about actually your quality of living.
It's a real challenge for people to be able to look at that though, isn't it? We talk a lot in the legal side of things, and it'd be interesting to see your take on this from sort of a financial side. We talk a lot about needs. What are your needs? So one of those needs is housing needs. So we've been talking about the family home. If the parties separate, we're going to need to ensure that they've both got somewhere that they can live afterwards. And it may be that the family home is a 4-bedroom property and there's, say, 1 or 2 children. And therefore the question is that too big for your needs? Can we sell that property and can we create 2 slightly smaller properties? But people get very, very hung up on certain parts of the settlement with the family home. And they will often feel that, well, no, I need to keep this. I could downgrade to, downgrade's probably not the right term, but I could downsize. That's a better one. I could downsize to a smaller property, but they then worry about the impact that it's going to have on the children. And it was interesting what you're saying is that they end up selling the house within 18 months anyway. And children tend to be quite flexible beings, don't they? So
I think with children, it's so simple. It's put a positive spin on it. You know, you're going to get a new bedroom. You're going to be able to choose what the bedroom looks like. You know, make it exciting, because I think it's all the words you use around it. If you're there, you know, moaning to friends and family in front of the children saying, oh, we're going to have to lose our family home, they're going to feel negative. But if instead you see it as a new exciting thing, you know, they get to come and have a look at the new house. And, you know, I've been through it. I've done it. You know, I've moved this year to a new house on my own with the children. And yeah, it's just about how you phrase it, I think. And also, I think what really needs to hit home is life is going to be different. You know, you have gone from 2 incomes to 1. There's now 1 of you, so never going to be able to have as much as you had before. It's sad and it's upsetting, and it's something you have to emotionally get through with, you know, likes of yourself. But I think once you're kind of over that, you can then look forward to the new, you know, your new journey.
And different doesn't have to mean worse.
Absolutely.
No, and a happier home. If you're going through a divorce and you've been in a not great relationship, then what I love now is I live on my own. I've got my own house with my 2 children. And it's so happy. Let's chill. There's no arguments. It's a nice, really nice place for them to be. So there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Home is what you make it. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's when you see that in clients' language, or I do, when it's the family home and then it's later the family house. And it's shifted for them from environment of what it represented of home to now this physical product of bricks and mortar. It's now a house, it's a property, it's family property, that kind of shift. But like you were saying about like take the kids on that journey as well. And like you haven't been through it. And I remember it being about like take them on the viewings, get them excited about looking at some of the different places that's different, whether that's be smaller or whatever. But then actually getting them to be excited about it. Like, what colour do you want your room? I remember when we first moved, my youngest Sam, he was 5, give or take at the time. And he picked a different colour for every single wall, including the ceiling. So we called it the Rubik's Cube room because it was like blue, yellow, green. And but that made it fun. And he didn't care at all that the room was half the size and that there wasn't a spare bedroom that had an ensuite now, or that the playroom has gone. Well, because now you're just going to play in the living room or in your room. And they don't care. It's more about the environment.
And they are adaptable. I think they're,
I'm glad I didn't have to paint the ceiling and the walls.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking, how did you do that?
So how many times I've painted that room?
I was like, I'm very impressed, Tom. So talking about the finances and the budgeting in the house, I'm sure you see as well that one of the worries is how am I going to afford the bills on the property, particularly if, let's talk about before we get to even the divorce settlement. So potentially there's going to be a period of time where you've separated, but perhaps one party has moved out, and therefore we're going to have to get down to the nitty gritty of budgeting to a certain extent, because like you say, we've gone from having sort of 2 incomes and 1 set of outgoings to suddenly having potentially still 2 incomes in this interim period, but now we're trying to fund 2 properties. What do they need to look at when they're considering their budgets, Jodie?
I would say have a real good look at, say, the last 3 months of your spending. I think in doing this, you will notice some natural, not great financial habits that you have. One for me, for example, is every time I go to the co-op, you can't not spend over £20. Like you go to, do you know what I mean? You go
That's
to buy
the cost of the bag these days. Isn't
like
it?
you go to buy some milk, but naturally you'll add a few things in. And if you're doing 1 or 2 of them a week, that adds up so much. So have a look at where you're spending money. What are really essential? You can't cut back on council tax. You can't cut back on water. But actually the food, and there might be some other things that you're doing, like clothes. Can you, cut back on these things? And it's about prioritization. So when you're looking at that, really, get into the nitty gritty of what's actually most important. Is it really important for you to be, going to co-op twice a week or getting a takeaway Uber Eats 3 times a week? These are things that I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but it really does add up.
And we fall into habits, don't we, of these things?
Yeah, and something I know I've spoken about before is like the emotional spending. I've done it myself. When you're feeling a bit down, you're feeling stressed, to get that instant gratification, you just go online and buy yourself something, because in that moment it feels good, but it doesn't make you feel good when suddenly you're worried about money. So actually be aware that it's so easy to do that during separation, and be aware of other things that you could be doing. So, if you feel down, you might, have a long bath, you might go for a walk, FaceTime a friend. And every client I've seen, when we've gone through their spending, there's always something that you can change. So I think understanding your current habits before you then try to think about your financial future is really important.
Things like subscriptions as well,
Oh
isn't
my
it?
gosh.
Like having a look at, because there's certain apps now that can also, you can link to your accounts, can't you?
Yeah, everyone has money that they're spending they don't even realise, and they're not even using the services.
No.
I do it often on my iPhone, go through, just make sure I haven't got any subscriptions running that I forgot to cancel for a free trial period.
Yeah, and again, like you say, it all adds up.
It all adds up, yeah.
Yeah. I suppose it can be particularly challenging as well if you have one party that's the higher earner. That must be quite emotionally challenging for the other party then, and particularly worrying for them as to, well, how am I going to, if they've moved out, I'm now dependent on them paying me some money each month. And I can talk about kind of legally what you can do in those situations, but you deal with a lot of women that are going through divorce, particularly when you have a female, because stereotypically it's often the female client who is divorcing someone that's earning more than them. How do you support them with that?
It is really hard, because ultimately if there's not money available there, they can be a bit stuck. The one thing I can encourage them to do is, get legal advice, because I see people in this position end up, taking a settlement that doesn't really suit them because they want out. But actually then realising, right, once we've actually gone through a legal separation, even if you have to borrow money off your parents or use a interest-free credit card for a while, that will then become part of the marital pot, and you will, you'll be okay eventually. So it's just trying to navigate it in a way that, keep your outgoings low, but also seek advice and understand that actually just because you've got this interim period where it feels really uncomfortable, that doesn't mean that you're not going to get your fair share at the end of it.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think to your point there is like about, I always say to people, like, you're kind of running 3 marathons simultaneously. It's a marathon within a marathon within a marathon. So making those snap rush decisions just because you want to get to an outcome that might not best serve you, and you're trying to reverse everything on you and do it all simultaneously backwards, because you think about like the most stressful things that usually happen within a relationship in your life, of like getting married, that's very stressful, buying the house, very stressful, having your first, second, third, fourth, however many children, all get stressful, and now you're trying to do all 3 of them at the same time in reverse. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is like slow things down.
Yeah, and also one thing I don't see people do is have a look what benefits you're entitled to, because a lot of the time people don't realise that actually, you know, as a single person now living in this house with a low income, you may be available to some benefits out there. So you can just go online and quite easily do, you know, what am I entitled to? And just make sure, you know, council tax, are you getting the single person's 25% discount? Are there any benefits that you can be claiming during this period? Because quite often there are.
Yeah, it's definitely a case of trying to look at maximising your own income. So perfect, like doing the benefits checkers, etc. But then if you are struggling and you're not able to meet the household outgoings and your ex-partner is refusing to contribute or not contributing enough, it's knowing that there are things that you can do with that as well.
Yeah.
So there are applications that we can make for spousal maintenance, which is basically for your ex-partner to pay you a certain amount per month to contribute towards your outgoings. We can do that whilst proceedings are ongoing. So we have sort of interim spousal maintenance, and then we can look at the end of the proceedings, is that something that should continue at the level, should there be a term, etc. But it's really important for people to know that there are options available, and just because their ex-partner has left and said, well, I'm not giving you any money, or I'm only going to give you £500 a month, that doesn't mean that that's the right answer there, and making sure that they get advice on that.
Yeah, it's don't struggle silently, you know, that we're all in these jobs for a reason. You know? And I've seen quite a lot of people go to solicitors at Stowe and get that support during them times for a financial order, because it shouldn't be that you're on your own struggling with everything, especially, you know, if you're housing children, then why should you be alone struggling with the bills?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes it just needs a little push, doesn't it? And we can,
in the right direction.
We can get there. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, to your point earlier, statistically, the lever is usually, I think it's around just around about 2 years averagely.
That they know it's happening.
That they know it's happening. So it's conceivable and usually highly likely they have already gone and spoken to a lawyer or a financial advisor. They've already started to gain all that data and information, so they're somewhat more prepared. So when you've got someone that is at ground zero, they've got all this information coming at them thick and fast, legally, financially, emotively, practically, around kids living, etc. So it's all those sort of things that people are panicking about, and it's thinking about how you kind of slow each of those kind of cogs down a little bit, which bits they need to focus on, but then getting their team around them as well, and getting prepared for what information do they need for their financial advisor, what information or questions do they need for their lawyer and their legal team, what are their legal options. I know that when I have clients come to me in the early phases, if they're exploring potentially mediation, a lot of people seem to have this, I don't know where it comes from, but this assumption that a mediator is going to fix it all for them and is going to tell them exactly what's going to happen. So a lot of my role sometimes is re-education of process as well. And like, these are your options and these are different approaches, and this is how to build your team around you. So
I think like when you feel like your relationship is going south and that there could be like a breakup, you know, coming soon, I think there are certain things that you could be doing as well. Like, you know, pay attention to finances. Don't wait until the marriage is over to suddenly, oh my gosh, what have I got? You know, make sure you do have your own bank account. You have your own bank account, you have your own savings, and make sure you've kind of protected yourself in that.
check your credit score.
Yeah, check your credit score. Make sure you're doing everything to kind of be financially independent within a relationship, because it's not only divorce, you know, if suddenly someone passes away, if you already understand your finances, you're one step ahead of the game, and then you can kind of focus on the emotional side of it.
I was thinking about what you were saying earlier, actually, about one party always kind of taking the lead in managing the household finances. And I was thinking back on my own marriage, and I was a bit like, if I died tomorrow, I'm not convinced that my husband would know who the gas and electric company are, who the mortgage company's with, who we have life insurance policies with, etc. And so it would probably be quite sensible of me to write these things down. So yeah, having that conversation is often really helpful to know just what all of these things.
I'd recommend like an annual check-in, like, you know, like your January when you're doing dry January, or like you're trying to be, you know, a bit more wholesome at the beginning of the year. Actually sit down and be like, right, you know, I always say like make yourself financial goals for the year. But even if you are the one who looks after finances, get the other person involved. Like, actually, this is what we've got. This is what we're aiming to do. So at least you've paid attention.
Being slightly wary, though, with divorce about somebody providing you with an Excel spreadsheet would be my proviso on that. It's not uncommon for clients to come in with an Excel spreadsheet that's been produced by the other party. And they're like, well, yeah, that's what we've got. And this is what I'm suggesting to be a settlement. And this is why it's fair. Because look, if you add it all up, it's 50-50. And it's great if the spreadsheet is correct. But, can you trust that information? So it goes back to the full and frank financial disclosure. And actually, 50-50 isn't always the right answer in divorce cases. So we start by looking at, almost taking all of the assets. So his name, her name, joint names, putting them into the pot. And yes, the starting point is let's split that 50-50. But then is it fair to split it 50-50? So it is only a starting point. And we then look at, with fairness, well, if we've got one party that earns more, if we've got one party that's got more of the assets, or we've got one party's mortgage raising capacity is much lower, it might be that a 50-50 split actually isn't fair. And we need to look at moving away from that.
Or there's a disparity in ages as well.
Disparity in ages,
that can make a big difference.
particularly when we're looking at pensions. One party might be approaching retirement age, whereas the other party might have another 10, 15 years to be contributing into their pension. And I think it's very easy to look at a spreadsheet and look at splitting it 50-50 and just say, well, this is all very straightforward. But unfortunately, the law is not as black and white as that. It's very, it's the typical lawyer answer of it depends. And it's about making sure that you've got really clear legal advice at the beginning. And mediation, I mean, I would hope that every single family lawyer that you go to visit these days, when looking at divorce or separation, one of the first things they're going to go through with you is how beneficial mediation can be. But it is also about having that advice first. Sometimes I think, you need to, particularly if your ex-partner is the one that's kind of landed this on you, it's a bit of a shock. And you're not sure what to do, being thrown into a mediation session can sometimes be a bit confronting and a bit sort of deer in headlights. And sometimes it is a case of just being able to sit down with somebody and go through your circumstances and hear from, your point of view, what the process is, how it could look like. Just that information gathering can lead you to feel so much more confident than going into something like mediation or having a conversation with somebody around the dining table if, you're able to do that. So I definitely think opening those lines of communication and then, like you say, building your team around you. So it's not financially viable necessarily to use your lawyer or your financial advisor as your emotional support. That's what divorce coaches are for. That's what friends and family are for, getting that guidance from the right people and really thinking about it and kind of.
The friends and family point. Though.
Yeah, it's challenging.
Is you've got to remember friends and family have got their own emotional attachment value to this experience and what's going on, how that news has been delivered to them and all the history that goes with it. And again, it's some of their own past experiences of either their own breakups, divorces, separations, or even growing up as a child of divorced parents as well. And quite often it's actually going to be really important to think about what boundaries you might need to have with friends and family who are there, our nearest and dearest, to pick us up off the floor and make sure that we still get up and have something to eat and have a shower and carry on and keep moving forward with our lives. But we also have to remember about sometimes we also maybe need to go, I need you for these things to help support me with, but actually that's where I need the other professionals to contribute as well for a wider understanding of consideration. So sometimes the outside influences aren't always
when they've got like an emotional attachment, for example, grandparents, or they're going to be in it for themselves and for you a little bit. Whereas actually going for someone completely disconnected, it's like going to therapy, isn't it? Like actually it's nice to have someone who's like not involved
just in your
to speak to about it.
Because they will be your cheerleaders, but they're also not necessarily going to shine that spotlight on the areas where perhaps you need to develop and think about things. And there's always sort of three truths when I think about divorce. There's his truth, her truth, the truth. And just because somebody is saying something, it doesn't mean that they're lying necessarily, but you could be in the same set of circumstances and really believe that that's what happened, and somebody else
has a
same set, but they've come at it from a completely different way. And that's not to say that either person is lying about how that conversation went, but it just means that they've come at it from a different perspective and they've taken something completely different away, particularly when emotions are high in things as well. And family and friends then can be challenging because they're obviously only hearing one person's truth often in the circumstance.
And also, so how has that information and news been delivered? And then start to think about if the children involved, and this is at the early phases of separation or divorce, like the talks, how are we going about that? Who's saying what? What are we delivering? What are we saying? What are we not saying? What questions might they have? What thoughts or questions are they internalising that they're actually not asking? And what things do we need to think about and be mindful of in those earlier phases if one party is moving out? Or equally, as we're kind of seeing in on-day terms, where actually not everybody is moving out when they're separating. More and more people are continuing to cohabitate while separating and divorcing. And that brings its own whole host of challenges and difficulties.
We call that these days the no split divorce.
We do.
And it's really challenging because we are in very difficult financial circumstances at the moment. The economy, people are finding just money incredibly challenging, high mortgage interest rates. And it means that when parties decide that their relationship is over, it's not uncommon now for them to say, actually, we can't afford to have two properties like we would like to. And therefore, we're going to remain living together for a period of time. And that could be 6 months, 12 months, 5 years post-separation. And you have to be very amicable to be able to continue residing under the same roof. You also need to be very cautious that there's no domestic abuse issues going on that's going to put either party or the children at risk. But also, I think sometimes it comes back to the point that you made earlier, Jodie, about really looking at, are we sure that we couldn't afford to downsize? Maybe this sounds great because we get to keep the house with the memories and everything at the moment. But actually, is there not another option? Because sometimes there is.
Something like nesting, potentially, where actually retaining the family home and that the parents are interchangeable to the family home. And it might not be that they can necessarily afford two separate properties yet in kind of for two full homes, but actually could there be an off-site location? Be that a studio apartment that they could potentially afford to rent, or could they go and each stay with friends or family, whatever it might be, to again create some of that more disconnect. And it can also help them start to build a little bit of a baseline of kind of what a co-parenting schedule could look like as well. That's something else to be considering in the early days is what are our choices, what are our options? And there's no, to your point at the very beginning, there's no one size fits all. It's about the uniqueness of your own situation.
And I think it's really important to kind of think about the here and now. Like, actually, that might be fine for 6 months. But actually, it's quite often when like new partners come into a situation, that's not fine anymore. One bit of advice I give to all my clients is like, when you first start separation or divorce, it can feel so overwhelming because there's so much to think about. But if you just give yourself every like week one little thing to do that can go towards it, and rather than thinking about the long picture, think about actually short term. You know, this week I'm going to just find out what all my assets are. I'm going to get my savings statements. Next week I'm going to do my budget planner. And like, if you think about little bite-sized chunks, but I actually lived with my partner for a year after separation, not voluntarily. It wasn't something I wanted to do. But I actually think that in doing so, it put pressure on the situation. And at the beginning, you know, obviously I was the main carer, him saying he wouldn't move out. Actually, after a while, it was like, right, we need to find a solution. You know, it's easy to say, oh, we can't possibly afford two places. But actually, when push comes to shove and you feel like what life is like in that situation, there is always a way. I think one of the best things someone said to me before I made the decision to leave my marriage was, if you really know, like if you know in the pit of your stomach, like this is not right, this is not what I want, you need to bite the bullet and do it and not think about the aftermath, because everything will fall into place. Like it always will. You know, if you start thinking about, you know, all these things that could go wrong, it can be really, you catastrophize. But actually, if you think, right, just, you know, daily, what can I do? What's the next steps? And then eventually you're there. And for me, it's so nice when I've, you know, taken on a new client and I see them a year or two after. I had a lady the other day, and she was one of the ones that actually wanted to keep the family home but didn't. And then actually she was on Zoom and she was in the new house like, look at my new kitchen, look at this, look at this. And I was like, oh, it's so lovely, because I remember meeting her for the first time and she was like emotionally drained, felt like there was no way out. But, you know, there is the way. And it's just, as long as you've got the right support network around you, you know, you take things day by day, you'll get there.
It's interesting that you talk about breaking it up. I always talk about staircase with my clients, because in that first meeting, they often want to know what the end result will be with certainty. You know, they want to know, particularly if they haven't ended the relationship yet, if I take that step, what is going to happen? And in that first meeting, I cannot tell them exactly what the end result will be, but it's exactly that. It's a case of, in the first meeting, we're going to talk about everything. So we're going to talk about mediation. We're going to talk about the divorce. We're going to talk about finances. We're going to talk about children. It's going to be really overwhelming because there's a huge amount of information coming towards you. That's not what the procedure will actually look like ultimately, because we will do that one step at a time. So we don't want to be looking at the top of the staircase. We want to be looking at what do we need to do to get us to the first step. So first step is deciding that the relationship is over, and then, right, what's the next step? Are we going to do divorce proceedings? Is that the next step? Then the next step, right, how do we start to sort out what we're going to do with the finances? Let's look at the disclosure. And we kind of take one step at a time, because actually I find where people get really overwhelmed is when they're 5 steps ahead.
Yeah.
You know, they're worried about something that we're not even at yet.
Yeah.
And actually that might never come to fruition because we might be able to sort it out before then. So it's that kind of, that catastrophizing, that worrying about what's happening too far down the road.
Yeah, thinking about the things that you can control.
Yeah.
I think I always use that in life, you probably do as well. It's like, actually, if it's something you really can't control, then don't worry about it. You know, think about what you can do right now, and focus on that.
And that's always interesting when you're looking at people that are separating, because we can't control what the other person's doing. We can't control what they're doing. We can't control what they're saying. We can't control how they're going to behave within the proceedings. All we can control is us. And it's about staying in that lane and not worrying. It's very easy for me to say, I appreciate that sat here, but, you know, not worrying about what they're doing or not doing, but just making sure that we're doing all the right things.
Same with co-parenting. Like, it's just like literally resonates so much. From like at the beginning when you're having separate time, you're like, they've given him the second McDonald's this weekend, or, you know, whatever it may be. Actually, you just need to focus on your time with them and what you can do in that time. And I think the biggest thing for me is once you realise, actually, don't expect too much. Do you know what I mean? Like, actually just think about what you can do in your time, and the rest you just need to kind of let them have their time and make their decisions. And I think once you realise that you can't control it, I think life gets a lot easier.
Takes the pressure off, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You've both talked about how you've been through divorce proceedings yourselves. If you could go back now and give yourself some advice right at the start, what would that advice be?
It's kind of touching on something we said earlier, which is slowing things down. Do not make rushed, emotionally reactive and motivated decisions. The person that has more information and can be more flexible has more self-control and has more power through this. So slow down, take your time, get informed, get educated, understand the process, like, of the steps that are in front of you, understand your options from financially, right? And think about and talk with people who have been through that process, that understand it, that know the pitfalls, and that can help you see the bumps in the road and to prepare for them. So slow it down. Don't have to make immediate, rash, reactive decisions. Take your time, figure out responsive, congruent, thought out decisions.
Perfect. Go on then, Jodie, follow that up.
I think I would save the time that we spent sending essays to each other about the emotional stuff. You get to the part where you're like, actually, if you're separating, doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. I think people get so caught up on like, oh, but he said this, but she did that. But none of that matters. What matters is going forward, what's best for the children. You know, how are we going to sort this out? It's not what happened in the past, it's looking forward. And I think there was so much time spent on looking backwards.
Treat it like a business transactional.
Yeah, it's a business negotiation. And if you can take the emotion out of it, it will make that business negotiation much smoother, because it's often the emotional side of it that creates all the turmoil within all the conversations and the negotiations. Interesting that you were talking about messaging. I think that's always a really challenging one, where you're sending text messages or WhatsApp messages back to each other. My advice would be to write a message as though a judge is going to read it in the future, and never send a message straight after you've written it. So always write it, put it to one side, because you can vent as much as you like.
Draft 3. Draft
I say the
number
notes
3.
on my phone, like 90% of them are messages that I was wanting to send people.
And sometimes it's, sometimes it is emotionally gratifying to write that long message and get it out of your system and put it down to paper. But it's often not helpful to send it. So just, writing sleep on it. And if you still want to send it the next day, fine. But most people will then edit it and be like, actually, that's the last bit that I needed.
Yeah. And I think kind of the world that we live in now, use the things where pertinent that are around you. Don't get AI to do your divorce for you, but things like the notes, write out your first emotive response message, and then stick it through an AI and be like, right, make this less emotional, take out the blame and accusation, give me a synthesized version, right? Use the acronym of BIF, brief, informative, form, friendly, but firm, right? Use those things and then still rewrite it yourself in your own word, but it can help to kind of challenge you and think about it a bit differently.
Yeah, and sometimes it's writing it and then thinking, what is it actually that I want them to do? what's the
what's the
action that I'm
outcome here?
expecting? Because actually, if the action is that I want them to take the children to football on Sunday, for example, telling them how awful it is that they haven't done X, Y, and Z before that probably is just going to get their back up, and actually you're not going to get what you want for the weekend. So it's about kind of thinking about what is the outcome that I'm looking for here, and then being a bit strategic then with how you manage that and manage that communication.
I think pick your battles is a huge one.
Yeah.
There's always going to be things that you don't like that the other parent does. Then you think, actually, is it really a big deal? Is it going to be, is this going to matter in a year's time? And if it isn't, just learn to let things go.
Yeah. Cool. We're coming up with loads now.
I know, right?
No, they're all coming up. The other thing is about more from the kind of the emotional side. Do give yourself time, space, and figure out your process to give it some space and time and to let it out. And whatever works uniquely for you. And again, coaches can help you figure that sort of stuff out. And as an example, one of the things that I used to do was every time I dropped the boys off back to the family home in those earlier days, I got back on kind of the dual carriageway that goes around the town that we live, back to where I was then living. And there was a lay-by there. For my sins, I'm a smoker. I'm sorry. But what I would do is I'd get on the dual carriageway, I'd go up, get to the lay-by, I'd pull over, I'd have my cigarette, but I would also put on a particular song that accidentally came on the radio the very first time I was doing it.
What song is it?
And I started crying like a baby, and I had to pull over, and I pulled into that lay-by the very first time. The song, very ironically, is Cat Stevens' Father and Sons. And I pulled over, and then I actually made that my little routine. It gave me like 5 minutes, pull over, listen to the song, I'd get it all out, and then I was like, right, I've given myself that space and time. Now I can kind of count myself back in, and I can go and carry on with my day. Right? So I wasn't ignoring it, I wasn't suppressing it, but just find the thing that works for you that's going to help get that out as well.
The other thing I was going to add as well earlier, when you say speaking to friends and family and how you shouldn't write, not necessarily, actually it's nice having a coach who's external, is ignoring hearsay. Whenever you mention someone divorced, they say, Karen up the road, she took him for everything he was worth.
And ignore EastEnders.
Yeah. And it's like there's always
the sitcoms because, they've kicked them out of the house and all of these
all
types
you've
of
heard
things.
is a version that's gone through 5 people. Yeah. And, for example, one that really annoys me, the woman will take everything away from the man. Right. That is not the case. I've got several clients who are, as a woman, they're the high earner. So actually half of their pensions go into their ex. It's nothing to do with gender. Yeah. It's the imbalance of the relationship and making it fair at the end of it. And I think I speak to a lot of clients as well, and they're worried about going through divorce because they're worried about, they might not be able to see their children anymore or, they're going to take everything and they're not going to have anything. But actually, that's the importance of seeing a solicitor is actually understanding what the law is, that you're never going to be left with nothing. You're not going to end up not having your children. Unless you've done something really wrong, I don't know. Yeah. But it's understanding no one's out to get you, and there is always a solution.
It's interesting you said that actually, because especially kind of post-COVID years and where we've all had like flexi working and things like that, I see more and more of male clients who actually maybe their wife, their spouse has actually been maybe the higher earner, and they've been a kind of primary carer, and actually some of them have been kind of stay-at-home dads as well. And what's really interesting between my female clients and my male clients, because I work with men, women, and couples, my female clients, one of the biggest things they're worried about typically is finances. So that's when I kind of introduce them with someone like yourselves. And it's my clients, my male clients, they typically are immediately worried about the children. So again, it's thinking about the different uniquenesses of different things that people worry about. But like you say, not to listen to the hearsay. And actually go and talk to the Karen down the street, not the, as you say, 3 or 4 removed. There are so many positive stories about people's separations and divorce where actually, and not to say that they're all friends and it's all lovely, but actually that they get along and they work through it and they figured it out, and go and talk to those people.
And it's so easy to feel alone. I was 30 when I went through my divorce. I was young and I didn't know anyone who'd been through it then. But over the last 7-8 years, I've helped loads of my friends.
You're the go-to.
I'm now the go-to. But actually, meeting people with shared experiences. Some of my closest friends now are single mums, divorced people, because you're going through the same journey. So I do think there's something in reaching out to people, but also don't believe everything you say. And as we know, family law is grey. There's not a black and white. It's not going to be that's how it's going to be resolved. It is grey.
And you're also getting only one of the truths.
Yeah,
right? If you're talking to somebody, you're only getting one of the truths.
Yeah, if you spoke to their ex, they'd be saying something completely different.
You get a completely different story, a completely different spin, and you might feel completely differently about the same set of facts. So it's really challenging. And also, you talked about hearsay, but also be very wary about what you're seeing on the television. So I talked about sitcoms and EastEnders and things, and that's the UK, but we get a huge amount of American television come over to us as well. And they have a completely different legal system with a completely different setup for courtrooms, a completely different setup for how the assets would be split, etc. And it can change state by state. And I think one of the difficulties is that people will have seen something in a film or on TV and that's how they think it's going to play out. And actually, that's not how necessarily it works here. So it's really important that they just understand what the situation is for them.
Yeah, and the internet as well. Like anyone can post anything on Instagram or YouTube and give people advice. The amount of things I get people to come to me about, like financially, oh, I'm going to invest in this because, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like you don't have to be qualified to post on the internet.
Yeah.
So, you know, make sure the people you're speaking to are qualified in what they do.
Yeah, the big buzzwords at the moment is AI as well. So obviously that's massive for us in the legal industry at the moment. But I'm assuming you get the same issues with clients asking questions into ChatGPT and kind of...
And it does give the wrong information sometimes. I've seen it give the wrong information.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying earlier about use it personally. Sense check yourself about some of your own thoughts or the things that messages that you want to write, but don't be doing it to ask it for your pension advice or whatever it might
and
be.
I think
advice.
I think in all of our 3 areas, there's something in sitting down with someone, looking them in the eye, that gut. That's the bit that the AI can't do, is give you that gut feeling. And, you know, something might be right on paper for my clients financially, but actually I understand emotionally, actually it might not be right.
Yeah. That's probably a really great place for us to bring it to a close. I talked about kind of within your own situations, what would you have told your sort of previous selves? But perhaps we could end just by looking at the number one mistake that you see people making in the early stages of a divorce and what advice you would give them to overcome that.
The most common thing that I see, and I know we have spoken about it, but is just wanting out and thinking short term.
Yeah.
I think especially when it comes to finances, and a lot of people don't understand pensions, what they are, how they work and what they will give them in retirement. So before giving it up, understand the implications of that rather than just thinking short term, I want that family home, this is what I want here and now. You know, how would you feel in retirement? You know, if you retire at 65, you live till 95, that's 30 years. How would you feel if your ex is having a lovely time and you're there really stuck financially? So it's looking after your financial future self and not making irrational decisions because you want out. You need to play the long game. You need to make decisions to not only look after yourself and your children now, but in the future too.
Yeah.
The bit that people forget, I think, is the bit that I would like to focus on in terms of that kind of consistent thing that people don't do. Because people typically, more often than not, and again, it's all fed through media-wise and things we've grown up watching, is you immediately, like, what's the phrase they use in the States? Lawyer up. Right? Go to a lawyer. People tend to focus on legal, neglect financial, and they forget about emotional. For me, it's under the kind of banner of, like, look after yourself as well. Like, this is a long road ahead. You're going to need a lot of strength, stamina, resilience, courage, a whole host of things to get through this. So you still just need to remember to be able to look after yourself. We were saying about the internet earlier and things like that. Like, what are you nourishing your mind with? What are you nourishing your body with? Like, how are you looking after yourself? Good sleep, etc. General self-care, like looking after yourself, because you're going to have a long road ahead and it's going to be hard to get through.
Perfect place to stop. Thank you so much for listening.